The following is an OPB original series.
Oregon Experience is a production of OPB in partnership with the Oregon Historical Society. Leading support for Oregon Experience is provided by Arlene Schnitzer and Jordan Schnitzer. Major support provided by the Oregon Cultural Trust, the Clark Foundation. Additional support provided by the Holzman Foundation and the contributing members of OPB and viewers like you. Thank you.
I didn't even know where Vietnam was, let alone what we were fighting for.
I answered the call. It was the right thing to do for my country.
What's success? What's our goal? And I'm not sure we knew what that was.
You want to save everybody. We did everything that we could.
By what moral right do I have the vote to send them to the death in an undeclared war?
I think most Americans are very uneasy about the war.
I'm not a pacifist. I'm not anti-war at all. I'm just anti-stupid war.
It was a divisive and really kind of a bitter time for a lot of families in our country, but there was a lot of honor.
You see guys all around you getting killed and you wonder why. Why did this have to happen?
Today we honor these young men from Oregon who did not return. This monument is the oldest Vietnam War memorial in the United States of its kind.
On June 9, 2016, Oregon's first statewide memorial to fallen Vietnam soldiers found its final resting place.
What was probably most unusual about this memorial is that it was built during the war. Most are built after a war to honor everyone. Tom McCall dedicated this exactly 48 years ago to the date, and we just wanted to recognize him once again.
This memorial is more than just brick and mortar. This is a living memorial. It personifies the unselfish heroism of scores of patriotic young men, and of course, heroism lives on.
In 1967, Corporal Richard A. Janigan, a radio man in the U.S. Marine Corps, was killed 10 days before his deployment in Vietnam was to end.
He died on September 21st, and he was hit by either a rocket or a mortar, but he didn't suffer. He didn't know what hit him. He was due to come home October 1st. He would have turned 21 on October 2nd. I believe the original thought with Mom and Dad was to honor their son. When this discussion started in with some of Dad's friends, it snowballed, and instead of honoring one, they felt appropriate to honor all.
With seed money from Richard's death benefits, his parents, Lee and Buck Janigan, sparked a community-wide project.
He had a lot of friends that wanted to contribute, wanted to help, and Mom would write a letter to the parents of the deceased and let them know that their son will be honored forever. And oftentimes these folks would send $5 or $10 and say thank you very much.
The granite memorial was built in less than a year, but not without concern for its safety.
There was a lot of turmoil back in the 60s. There was a lot of protesting going on, and there were threats that were made. So these guys brought their campers out and their camp trailers and surrounded it and made sure that nobody was going to mess with it while they were building it.
No one did, and once finished, the Beaverton Elks offered it a home, where it stayed for more than 4 decades, But there was one drawback.
And it was kind of hidden. I know Mom and Dad never liked that. People really had to go out of their way to find this memorial. I think the rededication was really to put this memorial out to where the public could see it. It should be a story about every name that's on there, every person that is there, including the missing in action.
Our parents would be so proud that it was here, and this is exactly where they would want it to be.
I guess this is a memorial to an era as much as it is anything else. So.
For those who fight for it, life has a special flavor that the protected never know.
I reported into pilot training in January of 1965. The basic tour for everybody in Southeast Asia was 1 year, except, of course, the Marines, who had to make it 13 months.
I enlisted in the Marines because I believed in the war, and my father had been a Marine himself.
I didn't want to be drafted, and I didn't want to join the Marines, so I went to Navy recruiter and told them I wanted to be in the Seabees.
I was in the U.S. Army. Got my draft notice at the same time. I got married that week after I was marching around in Port Louis.
I joined the Navy. I felt a distinct responsibility to my family, to my country.
I went to University of Oregon, finished up in early '68, and a year after I graduated, I was in Vietnam.
I was drafted in 1969 into the United States Army. I grew up in Central Oregon, in Madras, and then was working in Portland, and then all of a sudden I went to the mailbox, and there you go. A draft notice that still says, "Greetings from the President of the United States." And then they classify you 1A, meaning you're on your way.
The Socialist Republic of Vietnam stretches over 1,000 miles, bordered by China, Laos, and Cambodia. For centuries, the area has been a battleground.
They'd been at war forever. If you ever read the history of Vietnam, it all started out about trade routes.
For decades, France fought to hold the region as a colony. But in 1954, the French were defeated, and the region was divided near the 17th parallel at the Vietnamese Demilitarized Zone, the DMZ. To the north, Ho Chi Minh led a communist government. To the south, a non-communist government struggled to rule with American support. Both the Eisenhower and Kennedy administrations sent advisors to head off perceived communist aggression.
14,000 combat-ready soldiers of the 82nd Airborne Division assembled at Fort Bragg, awaiting the arrival of the Commander-in-Chief.
I went through training at Fort Bragg, North Carolina. I got to meet President Kennedy when he gave us the Green Beret.
Jim Privat grew up in Cave Junction. At 17 years old, he enlisted in the Army, training with the Special Forces known as the Green Berets. They were some of the first advisors Kennedy sent to Vietnam.
The advisor's primary job is to train and encourage the South Vietnamese fighting men they have come to respect and admire.
We taught jungle school, we taught long-range patrol, we taught the Vietnamese Army.
Special Forces did a pretty good job of prepping people to go.
University of Oregon graduate Joe Dye served 3 tours in Vietnam.
And I had a pretty good handle on the people I was going to work with, which were the Wahao, a militant sect of the Buddhist religion. They were basically in the Mekong Delta.
The Mekong River connects South Vietnam with the outside world.
There is a huge amount of traffic on the Mekong River. So we went out and established ambushes, checked craft on the Mekong and the Basak River for bringing in supplies that weren't supposed to be coming in. That was the whole mission for Special Forces in those days, was to get control of the border.
A dark page in the annals of America has been written to the crack of an assassin's bullet.
With the assassination of President Kennedy in 1963, Lyndon Johnson became president, inheriting the Vietnam conflict, which quickly escalated.
Now begins a new chapter in the history of
Johnson, what a tragic figure, got way over his head. I think it was a defensive posture that no president should ever lose a country to communism because of the political repercussions.
In August 1964, a U.S. destroyer exchanged shots with North Vietnamese torpedo boats in the Gulf of Tonkin. 2 days later, another attack was reported. By almost all accounts, that second attack never occurred. The president ordered retaliatory action, asking Congress to approve a resolution officially committing ground troops to Vietnam. Oregon's Wayne Morse was just one of 2 U.S. senators to defy the president's request.
And I'd have the American people remember what this resolution really is. It's a resolution which seeks to give the President of the United States the power to make war without a declaration of war.
The Vietnam War really made Wayne Morse almost a cult figure.
It's our boys doing the dying.
While Wayne Morse railed against war in the Senate, Oregon's governor and future Senator Mark Hatfield also spoke out against Johnson's policy in Vietnam.
As a young man in World War II, Mark was a naval officer, and his unit went into Vietnam, and it affected him profoundly. He was not a pacifist, he was not opposed to wars, but he believed that these types of wars, based on the Cold War philosophy, were wrong.
That this policy is an utter failure. This policy is leading us deeper into a quicksand of an Asian war.
With people like Wayne Morse and Mark Hatfield, Oregon was very much in the forefront for a small state.
Oregon's anti-war movement was active before most of the nation was paying attention.
I was probably the first clergyman in Portland to speak out. I was already very strongly opposed to the war. I think at that point it was too early for people to really know what was going on. It was too early for me to really know what was going on.
In 1965, Lyndon Johnson began his first full term as president. 3 months later, the first official U.S. combat troops arrived in Da Nang. Over the next 10 years, 2.5 million American soldiers would eventually follow, including more than 120,000 Oregonians.
When we landed, we had everything with us. Our rifles, our packs, all that stuff. And we came out and the heat hit me. It was the hottest heat that I had ever felt.
As we were going down, I was looking toward the rear of the plane, and they had these carts with bags on them. So I asked one of the guys, goes, "What is that?" And they go, "They're body bags." And I go, "Body bags? What are you talking about?" "Those are dead guys." You know, he went into more detail. And I had no concept of what that really meant. I was so naive. And it still didn't sink in that I was going to war.
I mean, hadn't gotten down the stairs, and you could tell this was a different place. I mean, it was really a smell of death. Of course, my first night with my unit, our ship blew up, you know, the USS Westchester, and I think there were 6 people that lost their life just in the berthing area that I was in. So it was just a little note of things to come, I guess.
You don't know a soul. That's what I think that people have to understand about the draftees in Vietnam. You didn't go as a group, you went as an individual. It's a very huge culture shock. And then when you're assigned to a unit, I remember that I was placed on a helicopter and sent to my unit, and I was the only person on the helicopter, and landed in the middle of a jungle with all your gear and all everything, and said, "Here you go."
We landed on the ships. They gave us all rifles. They gave me an M16 that who had it previously had apparently been wounded with it, because, you know, there was a little bit of flesh in part of the damn rifle.
They loaded me on a chopper to go find my company. And my company that I was assigned to was out in the jungle, right on the border where Laos met the demilitarized zone. in high mountains, I mean 5,000 foot, jungle-covered mountains, no roads, no villages. It was really like being in a vast national park where the rangers shot at you.
Carl Morlantis grew up in Seaside, Oregon. He joined the Marine Corps Reserves right out of high school as part of the PLC program, Platoon Leaders Class. In 1965, a National Merit Scholarship sent him to Yale and a Rhodes Scholarship to Oxford, England.
The Marines were great. They said, go ahead, we'll get you later. But when I got to Oxford, I felt guilty. 5 boys from Seaside died in that war. Not all in my class, obviously. I just felt bad. I was drinking beer and having a good time with the girls. It was great. But this feeling that I wasn't pulling my weight. The choice was, I can stay at Oxford and hide behind privilege. And I could have stayed there for 2 years and hoped that the war was over. I had a close friend who felt the same way I did. And he and I spent the whole night, I can still remember it, the whole night talking about this war, talking about what's the right moral choice to do. And we decided that we couldn't stay there any longer. I sent a letter into the Marines saying I'd go on active service. And he sent his draft card in and went to Canada.
Oh, I went for the U.S. Army. After I volunteered for that Ranger training, it was straight to Vietnam. You learn hand-to-hand combat, and they push you to the limits. And in fact, they push you beyond your limits. They wanted to make sure that you knew what you were getting into and you knew what you are capable of doing. And they ingrained in you to never surrender, to keep fighting. I felt gung-ho. I felt gung-ho, yeah. I felt like I was ready for anything. But little did I know.
It was a different kind of war, probably the most unusual war the Americans have ever been involved in. The politicians didn't really understand, because many of them were still thinking of the old World War II attitude as we were trying to capture ground, and we weren't.
World War II, we knew who the enemy was. They wore uniforms. They spoke a specific language. They were stationed in specific geographical areas.
The Viet Cong were everywhere. You didn't know who was Viet Cong because they looked and dressed exactly like the South Vietnamese.
Several of the senior officers once said, we're not fighting for territory, we're fighting for the hearts and minds of the people in South Vietnam, which is a very common quote that was made. And we were going about it in a rather odd way, blowing up their villages and then telling them they ought to love us.
Sometimes we'd be in an area where all you could see was vegetation. A month later, we went back to the same area. There was no vegetation because Agent Orange had been dropped on it. It helped us to see, and it helped us to survive.
You could smell it, you could taste it, you could feel it because it was real sticky.
Agent Orange was one of several herbicides used to kill vegetation in the thick Vietnamese jungles. More than 19 million gallons were sprayed over 4.5 million acres of land.
Everything was dead. Everything. There was no birds, there was nothing. And they said that it wasn't going to hurt us. And a lot of us believed that.
We actually had a president trying to tell people how to operate for the bomb. I think a lot of lives would have been saved if we just went in there, hammered them, and got the heck out.
The command structure was totally screwed up. You'd see very good targets and you couldn't hit them because they were outside of your rules of engagement. It was all being micromanaged by LBJ and McNamara.
Pilot Jonathan Hayes was trained and ready to drop atomic weapons if necessary.
The particular bomb that we were on, B-61, which is still the standard, 23 times the power of the Hiroshima bomb. That's scary. 26 years old. And I own this bomb. I've signed for it. It belongs to me. I'm totally responsible for it.
A second lieutenant. I could have 43 guys underneath me who would do anything I said. I mean, I would say, take the hill, do this, don't do that. Yes, sir. And they were all armed with automatic weapons and machine guns. All of that enormous power is in the hands of 22-year-olds.
When I first got there, I flew Hueys for a short period of time and then was able to get transferred into the scout platoon.
Larry Brown turned 23 on his first tour in Vietnam. He'd volunteered for the Army in '65 and wound up in the 1st Cavalry Division.
Vietnam became known as the helicopter war. Up until the 1st Cav had gotten there, helicopters had been used over there, but they didn't have infantry that belonged to them. 1st Cav was the only air mobile unit which had its own aircraft, its own infantry, its own everything. Our job was to go find, locate, and try to engage the enemy. If the shrubbery was 10 feet tall, the aircraft would be about 12 feet, maybe 15 feet. So basically you could see what's on the ground. Believe it or not, I tracked people from the air, be able to read footprints, find stuff on the ground. I flew with an observer. He carried an M60 machine gun. He sat in the door next to me. We were hunter-killer teams. It's search and destroy. It's very close, very dangerous. Your bait.
The 1st Cav Division, 1st Cavalry, was always needing medics because they were always in conflict. Medics were constantly being wounded.
Oregon native Dennis Guthrie joined the Army, went through basic training for the Green Berets, then decided to put his biology major to work as a medic.
Your job as a medic was emergency response, so you try to plug the holes, try to set IVs, keep them from going into shock. For amputations, you'd have to do tourniquets and control the environment as much as possible so that this person could survive.
Emergency medevac, ASAP. Chop priority.
When I was flying medevac, this guy, he had one arm left, and he's almost bled out. I couldn't even believe the guy was still conscious. And he's trying to tell me a dirty joke. In the chopper, with the wind blowing, screaming, and the whole 9 yards. But it was his way of dealing with the trauma to just stay conscious, keep working, keep his mind focused on something other than dying.
Which arm, Brian? Thank you, I can hear the radio.
You never got to follow up because you never got names. You never really, and I'm not sure I really wanted to know.
I worked at the 24th Evacuation Hospital in Long Binh, Vietnam. You would hear the helicopter at night or day or wherever. You just look out the back door and they were rolling them in on the gurneys and down into the emergency room. I volunteered. I wanted the experience, but when you get there, you find out it's a little bit different than, it's kind of rough. You're just wondering, oh my God, can I do this? Some of these guys, they were in surgery before you could even get half their clothes off. Get them in there as fast as you could and do the best you could. You're cutting off, cutting off the boots, cutting off the clothes. It's dirty, you're dirty. It wasn't a clean environment by any means, and it's amazing that we, all those guys made it. This uniform that I'm wearing, this is what we used. This was our uniform to wear, and it wasn't like we were wearing scrub clothes, or we weren't even wearing gloves. And these guys were coming in, and a lot of them had been exposed to Agent Orange. Sometimes you'd have 40 or 50 backed up. There were some patients, some of the head injuries that they would have to be put into what they call the expectant category. They weren't going to make it. They were put behind screens in the back of the ward. You want to save everybody. You want to do everything, and there's only a certain amount that you could do. We did everything that we could.
Statistics vary, but approximately 10,000 American military women served in Vietnam. Most were nurses, but about 1,000 worked in non-nursing positions.
And that I will obey the orders of the President of the United States.
And that I will obey the orders of the President of the United States.
Approximately 700 women served as WACs, members of the Women's Army Corps. They filled a variety of critical jobs, including clerks and typists, supply and intel officers.
I joined the Army from Eugene right after high school, 1965. I was stationed at Fort Monmouth, New Jersey, and we got called in to talk to the first sergeant, and she said, okay, there's going to be somebody selected to go to Vietnam, which everybody was like, where's Vietnam? I didn't know anything. In fact, I didn't even know anything about it when I was going to Vietnam.
Career Army veteran Donna Lowry arrived in country late January 1967. She was part of the first WAC detachment deployed to a combat zone since World War II.
It took us 45 minutes to an hour to land, and that was because of gunfire that was down there preventing the planes from going. And I got off, and I met my first sergeant, Marion Crawford, and Betty Benson, my field first.
Donna moved into one of the Quonset huts on Tan Son Nhut Air Base, just outside Saigon. She settled in as a personnel records clerk.
We got ourselves dressed up for work every day and had no weapons to defend ourselves. When Charlie, the VC, the Viet Cong, would come with the AK-47, the defense plan for the women in the barracks, our barracks, was to go to a particular ditch, and we were to jump up and kill him. And I was thinking, now how are we going to kill him? And my first instinct was, oh, our heels. We're going to throw our heels at him. Obviously, that must be the answer. And then a friend of mine said, no, Donna, we weren't in heels anymore. And I said, okay, what was the answer? And she said, oh, you don't remember? And she said, we were going to go spray him with our hairspray. And I was like, oh my God, that makes sense. In some sort of perverted way, that makes sense that somebody would be stupid enough to think that that's what we would do to defend ourselves.
In mid-1967, the WAC detachment moved to the U.S. Army post at Long Binh, northeast of Saigon. Women and men served together at the base and shared the risks of war. During the dead of night, on January 30th, 1968, more than 80,000 North Vietnamese troops and Viet Cong simultaneously attacked more than 100 towns, cities, and U.S. military bases across South Vietnam, including Saigon. The surprise attacks violated an agreed-upon ceasefire during Tet, the Vietnamese Lunar New Year. The WAC's original headquarters at Tan Son Nhut had been completely destroyed.
Quonset huts were gone. Had we not been moved to Long Binh for safety, everybody would have been dead. And that's what I mean is that in this particular war, there was nobody that was safe.
In 1968, Glenn Gordon was president of the Oregon Medical Association when he decided to go to Vietnam.
I was volunteered to go over as a surgeon to work in a Vietnamese hospital in Da Nang in the northern part of South Vietnam. We worked every day in the week from morning till night. I would leave the hospital and there would be many, many patients in the little ICU, sick, injured. I'd come back the next morning and half of them would have died through the night. So there was just no way to take care of the needs that were there. But you did as much as you could.
When he returned to Oregon, he joined with the local peace movement, giving talks about his experiences and his opposition to the war.
I ran across several people who disagreed with me, and we had discussions about it. It was particularly hard, of course, to talk to parents of men who were in the service and who were actually over in Vietnam. So it provoked a divisiveness in the country that gradually swung from being largely unconcerned about the war or in favor of the war to a group that was heavily on the anti-war side.
More and more people are beginning to recognize that we have got to get others to take over this war to enforce a peace, and we've got to stop making war.
But the war was far from over. Rifleman Charlie Hoy arrived in country in 1968. His superior officer soon noticed he had experience with a camera.
He said, "You're the battalion's new photographer." And I wasn't even really aware the battalion had a photographer. And he gave me a little speech. He said, "You're not a combat photographer, son." He said, "This is a morale job. Every time I see my guys and stories about them and pictures of them in the division publications, in the hometown papers or something," he said, "every time that happens, I see my guys," he said, "your stock goes up." The real elation in it was that out of all these hundreds of thousands of guys in Vietnam with a nasty job of picking fights, I had something to do. This is a good representation.
Charlie would take more than 2,000 photographs during his year in country.
I'm particularly proud of those things when I could do the simple things, and they wound up grabbing space in these, you know.
Most were never printed, and the negatives would remain boxed away for more than 40 years.
There is a sense of pride in being a grunt. You know, we all got medals and we all got this and we got all this stuff, but there's one thing that brings me more pride than any of them, and it's called a combat infantryman's badge. It was given out since the Revolutionary War, and it was only for combat soldiers. And that's the most important one to me, because I served with a great group of people that we took care of each other.
You don't have friends, you have comrades, and if you make it out, there's a brotherhood that you have with each other during the time, because you're relying on one another to make it, but some just don't. And there's no time for mourning.
There's nothing you can do to prepare somebody for combat so that they don't get hurt by it. And I mean psychologically and spiritually.
This is just one of my many books, pictures of me and the guys. And this is my friend Roniger. He was killed. It was February 20th. My best friend in Vietnam. Absolutely broke my heart. He was my platoon sergeant, and it meant that I was now the platoon sergeant.
A friend of mine that I met at Fort Sill, Oklahoma, and went through artillery training with, and went through airborne and ranger and all that stuff together. He got killed 2 weeks before we were to leave country. All of a sudden, we got ambushed. And everybody was screaming and hollering and ducking and looking to see where the fire was coming from. We had the colonel told us, send out a patrol and see what the body count is. It seems like that's all they were interested in, was a body count. And he wanted to send out a patrol, and the captain didn't want to do it, but he had no choice, so he sent out several guys, make a quick body count. And friend took 2 in the chest. He died instantly. Helped pull his body in, yeah. But I couldn't look at him. No, I couldn't. I didn't want to see him that way. There were a lot of us that wanted to shoot that colonel's helicopter out of the sky, but we contained our rage.
Yeah, but you become very hard once you see 1 or 2 go. It changes you, and you become a hard combat veteran then, because you know now it's about survival.
There were specifically 3 very, very bad days. December 2nd and December 3rd of 1969, the 2nd platoon ran into a battalion-sized NVA group, and they took the initial hit. I was with 1st platoon, then all the other platoons then converged to help them out. The next day, December 3rd, we couldn't go get our dead, and so we had to wait that night The bad guys had had time enough that they booby-trapped some of them. And so we had to be careful of that, but we managed, and we got our brothers out.
In early 2000, the surviving members of Castle's Bravo Company organized a reunion.
Over 30 years had passed since we had talked to each other, and we had never talked about this. In fact, this is the most I've talked about it in 48 years. When we walked into the room, it was like we had seen each other yesterday. There was a lot of healing at that point, but only we could heal each other because we had been through it together. And we had lived and we had mourned at that point in time the people who we had lost because we were older. And yeah, you never forget it.
Well, I thought I was going to be working on engines, and come to find out I was basically a M60 machine gunner.
Three-tour veteran Gary McAdams patrolled the Mekong Delta near the Cambodian border.
We left out from there at night or dusk and went through all the little rivers and channels up there to make sure that the Viet Cong were not moving or moving supplies or ammunition. And if it moved, it didn't move again. You know, unfortunately, the Vietnamese knew that they weren't to be traveling at night. One of the things that we used to do the next day before we started our mission was go out and check what we'd fired up the night before. And I personally had fired up this mom and two kids. I mean, it was tough for a long, long time. I bore that, what I'm going to call shame. You know, and you think, well, I should have known, I should have known.
We're thrown into this. They're thrown into it. I didn't choose to be born in Astoria, Oregon. Some guy didn't choose to be born in Hanoi. We're thrown into it.
Far from the Mekong Delta, near the DMZ, Lieutenant Marlantes was ordered to retake a remote hilltop from the North Vietnamese.
They were in bunkers on the hill above us. That's Hill 484. We had built those bunkers. It's a line of Marines walking out of the woods, going up a hill, totally exposed. And machine guns opened up from several locations, and everybody went to the ground. That means the assault stopped. And Marines don't go backwards. So there was no alternative. And I went running up the hill to take it out. And I thought I was all by myself, and it was probably about 5 seconds. And I caught movement out of the corner of my eye. And I hit the ground and brought my rifle because I was sure it was the enemy. And it was Brinson, who was a kid in my platoon. And then I looked behind him, and the whole line of Marines was coming up the hill behind me. We did. We took the hill, yeah. The battle lasted 7 or 8 days. The company got 121 Purple Hearts. I can't remember how many died, 17, 19. We were ordered to just leave it. We were all just stunned. What had we been doing? What had we been fighting for? When we abandoned 484, that's when I was like, there is something seriously wrong here. Seriously wrong. That was when it hit me. It's like, there's no objective to this war. Killing people is not an objective.
We were not fighting aggression in Southeast Asia to take over Southeast Asia. We were fighting to keep each other alive and get home. And that was the mission.
This is down at Loon Foons. This is part of the compound there at Cameron Bay. That's where I came down, refueled, and that's along the coastline. Coming down to see you.
Yep.
In 1969, Army nurse Carol Konieczny was training at Fort Knox, Kentucky. So was Larry Brown, back from his first tour in Vietnam. A friend introduced the two of them at a party.
Oh, he says, I want you to meet this warrant officer. He's crazy. He's shot down 7 times, you know, the whole story.
I was a little wild when I first came home, and I needed to be somewhere where I was fitting back in, and that fitting back in was to send me back to Vietnam.
Carol deployed in early 1970. Larry arrived in country soon after for a second tour up near the DMZ. They found creative ways to get together.
So I told her, when's the next day off? I'll take you with us.
I've never been out on a mission. And Larry says, well, I'll take you out there and you'll see what it's really like. And we went out to a fire base. He dropped me off. He went on a mission. And I remember just waiting. And then all of a sudden, they said there was a helicopter was shot down and there could be casualties. And so they were trying to get those people out.
In the meantime, Carol's hearing this on the radio.
We went to a couple of hospitals and he wasn't there, and he was actually back at his unit getting another helicopter to go back out again because he wasn't ready to finish up what his mission was that day. You just had to keep your fingers crossed and say your prayers at night and hope everything was going to work out.
Carol and Larry decided to marry in country.
We had to get permission to get married, and it did take a lot of paperwork. This is actually your packet right here that you had to get approval from your commander.
Yeah.
And then we had to be married by the Vietnamese first. So we have a Vietnamese marriage license. And this is the one that we got from the Army issues if you get married at the chapel there.
The Browns had a traditional wedding at the hospital chapel. "35 years later, they celebrated with a special ceremony.
And we went back and we renewed our vows at the Notre Dame Cathedral in Saigon. Then we traveled all over, and we really, it made me feel so much better about the country.
It's a beautiful country. They are good people, even those I fought against and everything. They were fighting for their cause, we were fighting for ours.
My dad was stationed at Adair Air Force Base just outside of Corvallis and had been through a deployment to Vietnam in 1967. He was gone for over a year. Where my mom had 5 kids at home without him and came back home, and we just picked up our lives and went on. We're a good military family.
The family had transferred to Kingsley Field in Klamath Falls when Joe Brett's older brother Robert, known as Lefty, deployed to Vietnam.
He was just like heroic to me. Just big fighter pilot, big brother, going off to war.
Just 4 days after arriving in Southeast Asia, Lefty and a co-pilot were flying a secret mission over Laos when they disappeared from radar screens. No one knew what happened. Both men were listed as MIA, missing in action.
So it was just a complete shock. My father took up the cause immediately, and he joined the board of the National League of Families of Prisoners of War and Missing in Action. So for a long time, we were just in this limbo of not knowing what happened, not having any real hope that we would be able to get any answers. But the only honorable thing we could do for our lost ones was to ask for and to demand at least attention be given to that.
By 1969, more than 540,000 military personnel were in country, the greatest number of troops during the war. And in the spring of 1970, President Richard Nixon officially authorized the invasion of eastern Cambodia. Increased bombing, he declared, would disrupt North Vietnamese supply lines and destroy their military sanctuaries.
So this is my flight log from every flight I took in the Marine Corps. Historically, the most interesting month that I was there was May of 1970, and the Cambodian incursion occurred. And you can see here I flew 2 flights on the 1st of May, 2 on the 3rd, 3 on the 4th, one mission on the 5th, lots of missions. I was in VMFA 115, which was a famous World War II and Korean War squadron, and we were stationed at Chu Lai, Vietnam. The F-4 was a 2-person airplane, a pilot in the front seat. Our job was to work with the pilot to get good, accurate delivery of the weapons on the target.
You're approaching our position right now. We should be at your
I flew in Laos, where we bombed the Ho Chi Minh Trail. I flew extensively in South Vietnam. In my case, most of my missions were close air support for Marines on the ground, so you were working to help them stay alive.
As the war expanded, thousands took to the streets in protests, especially on college campuses.
I was here at Portland State. I came to teach here in 1968, so I was a young, angry, radical professor. And I came here knowing that I'd had a student deferment from the draft, and I felt a moral responsibility to work against the war in any way I could, but I didn't really know what that meant.
Students and faculty organized teach-ins and moratoriums.
We see our role at the University of Portland as an educational one. Lewis and Clark, Reed, and Portland State will also be carrying on activities on their own campuses and throughout the city.
There were some cases of violence and arrests, but overall protests at Oregon schools were calm until May 1970. That's when National Guardsmen in Ohio killed 4 student protesters and wounded others at Kent State University. Students at colleges around the country walked out of classes.
I think it was important that students walk out nationally to show their rage at the fact that National Guardsmen were gratuitously shooting people on a college campus.
At Portland State, protesters built barricades around campus, stopped traffic, and set up a first aid tent in the middle of the South Park blocks.
I was a student at Portland State University. I was a writer, a photographer, and covering the news as well as taking my classes. There was protests every day, marches up and down through downtown from Portland State, and so my job was to cover those and take pictures.
Then, on May 11th, the situation exploded.
I now hereby command you all to disperse. Those that do not...
So we got a call that the police were forming. So I grabbed my camera, ran up there, and sure enough, there was a lot of police. I was just following along, taking my pictures the whole time. And all of a sudden, the officers started stamping their feet and using their batons heading towards the students. And the next thing I know, they were screaming and yelling. There was people being knocked to the ground with batons, being pulled away by their hair. I just couldn't believe what I was seeing, that was happening. I'd gone all week taking pictures, and I never thought that could happen.
I was standing next to some fellow who went after this cop. And the cop just took his baton and hit the guy on the head, and I swear it was like a cartoon. And the guy crumbled down to the ground, and I said, oh my God, I've got to get this guy out of here. This isn't right.
More than 31 protesters were reportedly injured.
Yeah, I'm a student at Portland State. I was in Vietnam about a year and a half ago. The police coming here perhaps to keep order, but they went too far yesterday. I really believe they went too far.
Army vet Dennis Guthrie tried going back to school at PSU. One day, his professor had missed most of the class because of anti-war activities.
He come in and he was all pumped up, and he had been giving speeches about the war and negative things that happened. I'm paying for the class. I'm not here to listen to him spout off about all this other things, his extracurricular activities. And he looks down from that podium at me and he goes, "You're a Vietnam veteran, aren't you?" I said, "Yeah, now get on with the class."
If they were to demonstrate, they should have been demonstrated on their congressman's lawn. That's where the demonstration should have been.
It's hard to be over there fighting the war when you hear protesters on the radio back home protesting about you, and then you're watching your friends die and stuff.
But many veterans joined the anti-war efforts.
Let them talk. I've been over there. I've seen this going on.
I've seen
people getting killed for no reason at all. They just
I was disgusted with the war, what I had seen and what I had been through. And I felt like I didn't want anyone else to have to go through that experience, because the war is hell.
Fearing additional violence in Portland, Governor Tom McCall made a bold move It might have ended his career.
Portland was scheduled to host the American Legion here with a full parade downtown. Well, the city fathers and the governor knew that with what had happened, that could be a dangerous situation. There could be some big conflicts.
And at the same time, Governor McCall organized a free rock festival out in McIver Park in Clackamas County called Vortex, which was supposed to attract young people away from the city so there would not be a confrontation with the American Legion.
Against all odds, the plan worked, attracting tens of thousands of young people away from the city.
There was no problems at Vortex. There were no problems downtown. Everybody said, you know, in retrospect, this was a brilliant decision.
I walked the streets. I was amazed there was that many people out in support of the American Legion because we had just had so many protests about Vietnam. But again, that shows the divisiveness of public opinion.
At recruiting offices around the country, some men turned in their draft cards. Others reported to duty but refused military action.
That's me, Private Johnson.
When Larry Johnson was drafted in 1971, he did not swear the oath of allegiance.
I call myself a veteran today. I love my country, but my country was doing something that was wrong. I went through basic training like every other grunt, and then when I came out, I could not fulfill my role as in the military occupational status that the computer had chosen for me, which was armament specialist, because I was a security risk.
He ended up in Saigon, working for military touring shows.
It was a system that was designed to utilize talent that was already in the military. And we put bands together, put shows together, and send them on tour around Vietnam. It's a cheap way to provide entertainment to the troops.
It was like, oh my gosh, this is where I want to be. And they put us together with a bass, keyboard, and drum player. And we decided to call ourselves the Electric Grunts. The guys, the young guys especially, really dug it. I'd fall asleep in a hooch listening to da-da-da-da-da, da-da-da-da-da, Led Zeppelin, over and over and over and over and over and over and over again. It was kind of like wink, wink. You can listen to your music, smoke your dope, just show up and do your job so we all stay alive.
We were support, we weren't fighting, so we were enjoying ourselves as much as we could.
Saigon and many R&R areas offered every type of distraction. Drugs, prostitution, and alcohol were readily available.
China Beach, guys would come down there. They got like 3 days in country R&R. Someone would come down, and then they wouldn't go back to their units.
Things were just starting to disintegrate. Some people think that that's one of the real reasons Nixon had to find a way to get out, because there were too many people coming over saying, you can't make me go out and risk getting myself killed. What for?
In October 1971, a remote outpost on the Cambodian border was surrounded by several thousand North Vietnamese. Soldiers from 2 platoons had refused to go on night patrols, describing the action as suicide.
Troops didn't want to go out on some of the operations because nobody wanted to be the last casualty in Vietnam. I was sent up there to try and sort it out, and I just, my approach was, I'm not going to ask these guys to do something I'm not going to do myself.
The incidents were eventually resolved, and the soldiers carried out the patrols, including one to rescue crew from a downed helicopter.
So I talked to them and told them what the importance of it was, and to cover the bodies. We don't leave bodies out, and the black box that's in the helicopter. It's been my experience, my 28 years in the Army, as long as you tell your soldiers what you need them to do and are willing to do it with them, they'll do it. And they did.
But back in the States, the temporary refusals had prompted a congressional investigation and further fueled anti-war dissent.
It was just handwriting on the wall. Our government was losing interest in the war and wanted to get it over with. You know, let's bring the boys home.
When my father was in the war, he wasn't done until the war was over. I was done when my 13 months was up, and believe me, I had a little chart, and every day it was like, 143 days and a wake up, and I'm out of here. And that was a very big psychological difference between the two wars.
Usually about when you have 45 days or less left, you're very extra careful. In fact, sometimes you're on the verge of obsession because you don't want anything to go wrong, and that's sometimes being too cautious, you screw up and you get burned. So
the last night on the fire base, we got rockets. To my last night on the fire base, I didn't even have my M16. I'd already turned it in. I'm going, oh God. So I stayed by the bunker. You should have heard the cheer on the plane. Then the pilot came across and said, "You're leaving Vietnamese airspace." Man, it sounded louder than the football stadium in that plane.
They flew us into Fort Lewis, Washington. We spent about 9 hours there processing out, and then they put us on a bus to SeaTac Airport, and that was it. There was no debriefing or anything. You were in, you were out. That was it.
I know a lot of people had bad experiences when they came back, but when we came back, they had a parade for us, and we were in full combat gear. The local people stood alongside the streets, and they all cheered us, which we didn't expect.
Parades were a rare occurrence. Unlike World War II, most of the country did not welcome returning Vietnam veterans as heroes.
I had a little old lady at the airport in San Francisco. Little old lady, I mean, jeepers creepers, just yelling at me, right into my face.
Baby killers, child molesters, and they told us that if we jumped the fence to go after them, that we'd go to jail. And it was close.
And we got in the car, and there were people shouting obscenities at us, spitting on the car, hammering the car with signs. It was horrible. I mean, I knew the war was unpopular, but I didn't understand why it was my fault.
Our country didn't thank them for their service, men or women. They just took their ID card and sent them on their merry way.
In January 1973, the Paris Peace Accords were signed, officially ending the war. On the last day of hostilities, Blue Angels Commander Harley Hall of Vancouver, Washington, was shot down.
It was terrible. We waited and waited. We just knew, that he was going to be picked up and that he'd be home, but it never happened.
The co-pilot was taken prisoner and held as a POW. Gwen Davis and her family believe her brother Harley was captured too.
My folks had refugees that came to them and told them that they had seen Harley being paraded through the streets of Hanoi in black pajamas, and them, the Vietnamese, saying, this was the big Blue Angels leader. So he was seen, after the fact.
In 1973, nearly 600 POWs were released as part of Operation Homecoming, including Harley's co-pilot. He'd been told by his captors Harley had been shot and killed. None of the others reportedly had any additional information. Then, in the 1980s, there was a break in the case when teeth were given to recovery teams in Vietnam.
We know they were Harley's teeth because Mary Lou, Harley's wife, had dental records, but they had periodontal disease on them, which meant that he could have lived for 10 to 20 years. And then 2 of the teeth had extraction marks on them.
The military closed the case, listing Harley Hall as presumed killed in action. But for many, he is considered the last POW of the Vietnam War. By 1975, nearly all American forces had left Vietnam, but many allies remained. On April 30th, Saigon was overtaken by North Vietnamese troops. People swarmed the American embassy in a last desperate effort to flee.
They were taking helicopters off the tops of the buildings, people hanging on to the bottom of the helicopter trying to flee Saigon at the end of the war. That's how we left.
I was teaching first grade at Mount Angel. It was then that word came that we were going to have 100-some Vietnamese refugees. Colonel Harry Lambert had a farm near Mount Angel. He called the monastery and asked if it was possible for us to take care of a plane load of Vietnamese refugees.
Those people have been friends to me when I was in the Orient, and now we're having an opportunity to return some of the kindnesses that they did to me.
The Benedictine Sisters of Mount Angel and the community went into action.
Sister Adele Mansfield got on the phone and called the city and asked if there was a possibility of using the Oktoberfest building. They agreed, and in just a very short time, the town was buzzing. People came in with blankets, pillows, food, lots of rice.
There were some families and Vietnamese nuns, but most of the refugees were orphans. Many had been stricken with polio.
Some were adopted, some were taken as foster children, others were reunited with other family members or people that they knew in the country. In 1 month, they were all distributed somewhere. It was a very wonderful experience of community service, working together.
Over the years, thousands of Vietnamese refugees would find their way to Oregon in many different ways.
When Saigon fell in 1975, my dad was in Saigon.
Thao Thu's father was a captain in the South Vietnamese Army.
My dad was a high school math teacher. In 1966, my dad had to join the army.
At the end of the war, the North Vietnamese ordered him to report to the local Army Control Office.
My father was transferred to the POW camp on June 19, 1975. In total, my father had been living in the camp for more than 7 years. And when he went home after 7 years, I already finished my high school.
Thao's father remained under house arrest for another 2 years. Finally, in 1991, 29-year-old Thao and his family were allowed to leave Vietnam.
I came to Portland on July 23rd, 1991, and I became U.S. citizen in 1997. I was so excited to become U.S. citizen.
In 1979, Thuy Huyen's family decided to leave Vietnam against all odds.
People cannot escape unless you were either Chinese, pretending to be Chinese, because Vietnamese communists were trying to push all the Chinese people out. So we had to make false IDs. So my mom cut my hair, my sister's hair, and we pretended to be Chinese people. So we had to pay a whole bunch of money, like gold, for each person. And my grandmother was wealthy, so she literally gave each of us a life vest to escape. And that whole trip, we were the only ones with life vests.
They left by night in a fishing boat, overloaded with 300 people. 4 days out to sea, the boat began to sink.
We have our life vests, we're not gonna die. So we took the risk, we jumped off, and then a few hours later, another boat came and took us in. They were pirates, Thai pirates. Luckily, none of my family were raped, so we were very fortunate. My mom was really smart. She hid a whole bunch of jewelry in her body and in her hair, and she was able to exchange that for our lives.
They moved into refugee camps in Indonesia for the next year, before sponsors brought them to the United States. Thuy would grow up in Texas, but Oregon would become home. In 2016, she was named Ms. Oregon. Today, about 30,000 Vietnamese people live in Oregon.
Some have lived in America for more than 40 years after leaving Vietnam.
And former refugees like Thao and Thuy volunteer their time to keep the community strong.
It is so important to keep the Vietnamese cultural heritage while we live far away from our true homeland. I love this country.
Retired cabinet maker Charlie Hoy had nearly forgotten the thousands of photos he'd taken during the war.
95% of them had never been printed, except maybe a contact print to decide whether this one or this one to print.
But a chance meeting at a shared workspace and studio in Portland would be the genesis of a remarkable project.
I brought my camera to ADX one day and shot photos of him with his wooden spears and was taking all these photos, and he just very casually in conversation said, "Oh, you know, I used to be a photographer too." And I said, "Oh, really? What kind of stuff did you shoot?" And he said, "Well, Vietnam mostly." And my response was, "Oh, did you go on vacation there or something?" And he said, "No, during the war." And that kind of kicked that off. And he handed me this envelope, had his handwriting on it from 45 years before. And I started to sort of shake some negatives out of it, and I pulled one out and held it up to the light. And Charlie said to me, "I don't know what you're going to find in there. There's probably nothing really worth any value."
You have to understand that for me, they were kind of like pictures of my family's trip to Yosemite. They didn't have any particular importance. I never saw them as, I certainly never saw them as art.
And I looked at those compositions and immediately knew that that was not the case.
For the next several months, Chris scanned a couple thousand negatives and revealed a long-forgotten time.
That's a great photograph because it's just peering into the soul of that guy, and there's so much about that moment.
An idea soon surfaced to give the photos a wider audience.
My weather walked in is the circumstances of my life on any given day or at any particular hour. That was my motto: do the best you can with today and don't worry about the rest of it if you can help it.
Today, in gallery shows like this, Charlie's long-lost images are touching the lives of vets and non-vets alike.
Well, when I first saw it, I was wondering how he got in front of me. I was supposed to be on point, so I think it shows a little determination that everybody had when they were there.
We happen to have a print of that. Circa 1968.
Yeah. I was in the Air Force and I was in Saigon in 65 and 66.
Oh, really?
Always been inspired by people in the military and what they do for our country. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Casey.
One of the things that I've found since working with Charlie is that his photos aren't about the war necessarily, they're about people and they're about community.
I'm celebrating everybody in the photographs.
And it's nice to be spearheading a little movement to kind of say, these were the people, these are the heroes.
Shortly after I got back, I started having lung problems, and I've had that ever since.
More than 40 years after the war, many veterans are still struggling with health problems related to their service. Currently, the federal government recognizes at least 14 diseases caused by exposure to Agent Orange, including several types of cancer.
And so I got the stuff all over me.
I mean, I got a hold of my hair. Before I left Vietnam in 1970, I started having growths come up all over my body.
Town hall meetings like this one provide information to veterans and their families.
Can I get some answers somewhere? I have no answers yet.
I got diagnosed with Parkinson's disease in 2014, and it's on the Agent Orange registry, which means I get free treatment at the VA.
The U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs, the VA, operates a Portland hospital and care facilities across the state.
John, you want some more?
But accessing benefits can be complex. Many veterans are helping others find and get the services they need.
The person that hasn't been into a situation like what we've been through, I mean, they can think they understand it, but it's, until you've been through it, you don't know what it is, you know.
I wanted to do something to help the minority veterans get their claims done, because nobody was talking to them about getting their claims.
Gary McAdams gives back by managing AMVU, one of the first organizations of its kind.
AMVU stands for All Military Veterans Outreach Organization. This is owned and operated by veterans, Veterans Center. There are no government ties here whatsoever. How do people find out about it? Veteran to veteran. We're not giving you a hand out, we're giving you a hand up. Everything's donated. You know, it all comes with love, and it all comes by the grace of God. We do laundry for the homeless veterans. I have a pantry here. We have a clothes closet. I got a baby closet, probably one of the largest baby closets in Clackamas County. A one-stop shop, and that's what we've done.
Our country needs to realize the true cost of war and the aftermath and how it impacts on marriages and families and communities.
You went to Vietnam at 20 years old, served a year in combat, and then you come home and quite honestly, you are 35 to 40 years old, mentally.
War, you see stuff that nobody should ever have to see. You see stuff you don't want to see.
Our lives were disrupted for years. We came out different. We were living in a war zone and seeing the tragic effects of that war zone on people.
When I was taking a nap, I forgot to tell her, don't touch me when you want to wake me up. Just call my name. Just call my name, and I'll wake up. And she came over and shook me, and I just automatically grabbed her and threw her over the bed, and I was getting ready to hit her when I realized I am not in Vietnam. I am not out in the field. This is not the enemy.
Well, I was pretty shaky when I got home. I had anxiety attacks for quite a while. I came back with the goal of wanting to be a counselor or a psychotherapist. And I found my direction in life, of all places, in Vietnam. In my career as a therapist, I've talked to lots of vets who basically, talking to me years later, was the first time they'd ever talked about it. So many guys just tried to bury it.
I didn't ignore it. I just put it at the bottom of a Jack Daniels bottle. You know, I became an alcoholic.
Somebody blasted the horn at me, and I got out of the car, and I came to my senses kicking his windshield in. I was on the hood of his car kicking his windshield in because I was just screaming, you know, lots of bad language at him because he had startled me. And it was like, why is this guy doing, you know, I wasn't thinking, it was just a reaction. And that's what saves you in combat. Your brain is rewired so that if something like that happens, you're not thinking, you're just taking care of it.
Carl Marlantes was working as an international business consultant until one day in Singapore.
I went into the boardroom, and on the table was a pile of dead bodies. And I went, I know they're not there. I know they're not there. And I look again, and there they were. That was Vietnam, and it was dead Marines in a pile. I quit my job in Singapore because I was falling apart.
Back in the States, Marlantes met with a counselor.
He says, okay, now what kind of job stress you got? Can you tell me how it's manifests? And I tell him stories like taking the cupboards out and running around naked at night, and the one about the incident where the guy honked his horn. And he looks at me and he said, were you ever in a war? And I broke down sobbing. I mean, I'm talking about not crying and weeping. I'm talking about snot coming out of your nose, sobbing, uncontrollable. I couldn't stop it. And when I sort of get it under control, he says, you have something called post-traumatic stress. Have you ever heard of it? No.
PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, was first officially recognized as a mental health condition in 1980. But it has affected returning soldiers for hundreds, if not thousands, of years.
When I came home, there was nothing about PTSD. It hadn't even been identified. And there was no medications. I couldn't walk in the woods for the longest time. I couldn't see a hole in the ground without having a flashback.
It was pretty clear pretty early that something was happening that I don't think either one of us understood.
Like many families, Colleen and Jack have spent years dealing with the effects of PTSD.
We were in therapy, I mean, for the first 12 years. And so I think it was 10 years before anybody said anything about the war.
Eventually, they began hosting a series of veterans retreats and workshops.
God helped me so that I could share what I experienced with other people, hoping to heal the pain associated with war.
Well, I had to lose everything, as they say. I ended up downtown Portland in a cardboard box, and I ended up going to therapy in Vancouver in 1996. Because of either suicide or being robbing people, you know, criminal or going insane, you know. So I went to recovery and go to group for PTSD veterans every Tuesday, and they give me my strength like my squad did in Vietnam.
For many Vietnam veterans, writing has been cathartic.
I later figured out that a big unconscious part of writing Matterhorn was I really wanted to just tell our story. What was it like to be a kid growing up in a war like that? Just, this is who we are. We're just kids growing up. You know, we're not diplomats. We didn't, we didn't start this war.
This was what I was given the original master list of the Vietnam women vets. So that's the organization we all belong to. And that was how I started this book, with this list of women. I think the important thing for us is that I would like to get these women, many of them that are deceased, recognized for their service for their country. And I don't think another memorial is going to do that. Having the opportunity to share with people these incredible women's stories, that's important to me. They inspire me. They inspire me.
Oregon's Vietnam veterans are involved in a wide range of organizations dedicated to helping all those who have served. From the honor guard riders at veterans' funerals to those doing national advocacy.
I had a psych once tell me that I'm still trying to save those that I couldn't save in Vietnam. Helping veterans is just, it helps me heal myself, helps others, so it's a win-win situation.
In Redmond, this working ranch is offering all veterans an opportunity to connect with each other, the land, and the community.
It's a safe place, and it's a safe place that veterans can interact with other veterans that have been through the same thing, no matter whether it's Vietnam or Iraq or Afghanistan.
Team leader. I turned 26 in Vietnam. I was an old man. I was older.
American POW. Cool. That's a North Vietnamese guy.
We got to get more of the management of the farm so we have everything more organized.
Former VA trauma counselor Allison Perry found inspiration for this ranch working closely with Vietnam vets.
And it's really centered around this idea of community, peer support, but
especially meaning and purpose. It's incredible to see something make a difference, particularly for people who have suffered for so long in silence.
I wish this would have been here when I came home, because I can come out here, I could close my eyes and not be afraid that someone's going to sneak up on me and mess with me. And to come out here and be hugged by a Afghan or Iraqi vet, you just don't understand the feeling of veterans helping veterans, and just, I don't have to talk to them. We don't talk about war or nothing. It's just, we know. That's why there's a hug there and the smile.
This place is extremely important to me. You can trust people that are here. Through my Rotary Club and other things, I'm doing everything I can to help this place flourish.
This is an environment that is intended to help heal the soul, that is to bring beauty to veterans. That's not something they're going to ask for, but that's something that resonates them when they come.
Ultimately, the ranch will provide specialized end-of-life care for terminally ill or aging veterans.
I thought, what would it be like to have an environment where these veterans could die in peace and could support each other on their journey out?
We're going to take a group photo.
In other cultures, warriors possess wisdom. Warriors have something to teach us. Veterans have something to teach us.
All right, there you go.
On the Warm Springs Indian Reservation, Larson Kalam is welcoming veterans home in a different way, with Native American traditions and ceremonies, inspired by visions of warriors returning from battle.
The warriors are just like being a veteran. They go to war, they come back.
He started annual healing circle gatherings. Veterans come from across the country.
The family too, because they're hurting.
Let the healing begin.
And that you put all your prayers on there, and all your prayers will go upward to God, we call Pusha.
One of the many ceremonies includes symbolically washing away the war.
The red represents the blood, and the black remembering things that happened. That's just like taking the pain away from you. It is real powerful, real strong. We all work together as one. So we're still healing day by day.
In 2016, American and North Vietnamese pilots organized a joint in-country tour and a reconciliation dinner in Hanoi.
The atmosphere for the first couple minutes was that of a junior high dance. You had the two groups, the Americans on one area and the MiG pilots lined up in another. And then we quickly realized that people that had fought against each other in the skies over North Vietnam were arranged at the same tables. And the translators helped get the conversations going. So we had cases where guys were meeting the guy they actually shot down. It was amazing. And it wasn't personal. You were fighting an airplane, not an individual. Within an hour, it was not awkward. The guys actually got up on stage, and the 2 or 3 people that were involved in the fight would brief the fight to everybody else in the room. For some guys, it was closure. They were there to kind of write the end of a long story. That's a Vietnamese saying, and it's how they view the American war today. Remember it, it was an important part of their history, but don't get stuck in it, move forward.
Today, Oregon and Vietnam are looking towards the future together. A unique program based at Portland State University is building strong partnerships in business and government, education, and the environment. It's called VOI.
It stands for Vietnam Oregon Initiative, but in Vietnamese that word is to go forward together, not just with having to, but with some joy and some happiness. It is the first of its kind relationship between the country of Vietnam and a state.
Joint programs and projects are active in several Vietnam provinces. The Build It project is bringing PSU and several Vietnamese universities together to develop better curriculums in science and technology.
The bottom line goal is to help the Vietnamese move forward into the next phase of their economic development through better prepared workers.
Vietnam has to have a sustainable energy resources, and I feel that in the future, even now, it will need people who are trained in economics, especially in energy, to come back and then to work and to provide sustainable solution for the country.
The governor of the province in the north attended my leadership development program. He said, I visited your city of Portland. I think I can make our province a green province like Oregon. That's my vision. I need your help.
Over the next 20, 30 years, this could be one of the major economic powers in that part of the world. One of the things that we feel here at Portland State, but I think in Oregon too, is that these efforts to, in a sense, repair some of the wrongs that were done to now mutually help each other, it's something that I think Senator Hatfield would especially be proud of.
Over the years, better relationships with Vietnam have resulted in more access to information about lost U.S. servicemen.
But that's an actual evidence bag, reference number 1929 to August 00. So that's right.
Lefty Brett and his co-pilot had been missing for decades when military recovery teams made a discovery on a Laotian hillside.
They had to bring in 80 and 120 local workers each time they came in. We're talking about a team of Americans of up to 50 or 20 people of all these different experts in all the different sciences that go to work on those crash sites. So they would have to shuttle in and work for days at a time, and it took a couple of years to actually acquire all of this evidence to give them the confidence to say to our families, we've solved your case.
A tooth of co-pilot William Coltman was positively identified, along with other personal items belonging to the two missing men.
His chain from his necklace that really hit home. From my mother, for that closure for her, we were really happy that she got that, and she felt a sense of peace and a sense of gratitude.
Their remains were buried at Arlington National Cemetery with full military honors. More than 58,000 U.S. service members died as a result of the Vietnam War. Over 800 of those were from Oregon. Their names are listed on the Oregon Vietnam Veterans Memorial in Portland's Washington Park. It is one of many memorials dedicated to Vietnam veterans around the state.
If there's any feeling of the war that I have, it's the sadness at the waste of it all.
It just ended up being a total disaster for everybody. It was just a mess.
To me, being a Marine, I'm proud. I always will be, no matter what.
I'm glad that I was able to go to Vietnam and being able to do what I did, learn what I did, and have the friends that I have because of it.
I'm proud of my service in Vietnam. I'm proud of the young men and women fighting today for our country.
Every day since I left Vietnam for me is gravy. Every day is gravy. Because my best man, he didn't leave Vietnam.
You know, we'll probably never see another war just like Vietnam. Hopefully not.
There's more about the Vietnam War Oregon Remembers on Oregon Experience Online. To learn more or to order a DVD of the show, visit opb.org. Leading support for Oregon Experience is provided by Arlene Schnitzer and Jordan Schnitzer. Major support provided by the Oregon Cultural Trust, the Clark Foundation. Additional support provided by the Holzman Foundation and the contributing members of OPB and viewers like you. Thank you.